Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the different types of deactivating strategies that the dismissive avoidant tends to have and how they present themselves in a relationship. So before I dive into the video content for today, I just want to let you guys know we are doing as much as we can to support our community right now. We are doing a stay-at-home sale that has 25% off of all of our courses, our individual course purchases, as well as our membership bundle. So 3 months, 6 months, etc. And the coupon code is with you. It's all one word, and you can just basically enter it into the page when you go to apply coupon as you go to enroll. We are also offering scholarships to our community right now. If you have any questions about that or you are looking to get involved in that, please email info@personaldevelopmentschool.com. And in the meantime, I'm also trying to do a daily video to support our community in that way here. And you are welcome to leave any comments you have or questions you have about a specific topic you want to see in the next videos below. And I'm basically creating content according to that, as well as according to the different questions I get inside of the members lounge inside of the school. So thank you for being here. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing to this channel, and let's talk about this piece of content. So a lot of individuals ask me specifically about deactivating strategies. So if you're not familiar, deactivating strategies are essentially these sort of automatic, autopiloted push away strategies that both the dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant have. And deactivating strategies can even show up to a certain degree for somebody anxious or secure, but they're a lot more minor, and the actual thought processes behind them tend to be quite different. So for example, you might see an anxious person having deactivating strategies that are like, I'm a burden, I'm not good enough, I should stay away. And they're sort of about like themselves not being right or good enough. Whereas the fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidance, with the more true, sort of powerful, not in an empowering way, but sort of painful, stronger deactivating strategies tend to be like, I can't do this anymore, the relationship's not working. And what I find is that fearful avoidants actually have the most, like, for lack of a better word, rude deactivating strategies in the way that they think about the partner that they're with, where they're like, I can't do this, I need to get out of here right now. And the thoughts themselves, if you could hear them, and I've asked these questions to many different people in client sessions over the years, the thoughts themselves are more, they're just more deactivating. The fight or flight response is stronger. And that's actually because there's usually more painful emotions stored at a subconscious level that's being activated. And those emotional imprints being so strong create sort of like a more painful internal dialogue in relationship to the person that the fearful avoidant is with. Now, I'll do that in a separate video and talk about that in a separate video, but today I'm going to focus on the dismissive avoidant themselves and what their deactivating strategies tend to look like and the different types that exist. And I'll do a series on this for all the attachment styles. So the dismissive avoidant will have a lot more consistent deactivating strategies, like in terms of frequency, but the severity and the intensity actually tends to be less than when the fearful avoidant gets activated in a deactivating way. Activated being like triggered, right? So if you look at the different types, here are the different strategies the dismissive avoidant does to keep somebody at bay. And I'm not talking about it at the thought level any longer. I'm just talking about the general strategies for deactivating as a whole. So our first one is physical distancing. And I've had this conversation with many dismissive avoidants over the years, where if their partner is like too warm, too loving, hugs them for too long, hugs them when they're feeling a little bit withdrawn, is too affectionate, something like this, sometimes it might even be an understatement, it's not uncommon, let's just say that a dismissive avoidant will even like kind of push the partner away. And it can come across as kind of like rude a lot of the time. And what's actually happening, and I've had these conversations like, hey, what's happening inside of you when you do that? And I've asked these questions to many dismissive avoidants, and they'll say it just feels uncomfortable because it feels vulnerable. It feels like a little bit overwhelming and like too much. And think about it. If you have a certain subconscious comfort zone for what love is, maybe if you're the fearful avoidant or the anxious person, if somebody starts just like showering you endlessly, if somebody starts showering you endlessly with compliments, like just won't stop, at some point in time, you might feel like a little bit of overwhelm or like need to retreat or withdraw if like somebody's just complimenting you, let's say for an hour straight or whatever it is, right? Like we all have a certain point in time where it's like, whoa, that's enough. That's a little too much. It feels a little overwhelming. And for somebody rooted in fearful avoidant, that might be quite quick. For somebody rooted in anxious, they might have a higher need for that to a certain degree to feel validated and safe. So that might be a little bit longer of a barrier. But at some point, you're going to have a point in time where something still feels like too much. That point for the dismissive at a physical level just is very early, right? They're not used to that. It's outside of their comfort zone. It feels overwhelming. And so they actually have like this automatic nervous system response to like push back, push away. And a lot of this is coming from a feeling of a need to self-protect or to feel safe. So physical distancing is one type of deactivating strategy. Another deactivating strategy is, I'm going to call this the vulnerability hangover deactivating strategy. And this is when somebody, let's say a dismissive avoidant, has been open, been vulnerable. Maybe they've expressed themselves or shared something that's like a little bit personal. They then will feel this, it could be right after, it could be the day after. They'll then tend to feel this feeling of like, oh my gosh, that was too much. And because their deepest subconscious associations say vulnerability equals a lack of safety, and because safety is such a high need at the same time, usually their natural tendency or coping mechanism when they feel like they've been unsafe because of how much they've expressed, they tend to withdraw and retreat in that way. And so they'll have deactivating strategies in that form. Now, when this happens, okay, it's not because they think at a conscious level per se that expressing something or being vulnerable is bad. It's happening because when they were young, vulnerability didn't feel good. And in fact, maybe if they did try to emotionally express themselves in childhood, it was met with some form of rejection, judgment, shaming, especially for men, right? Like, don't show your emotions, be a man, don't be weak, like all the really painful messaging young men have gotten historically, right? So they can have these stored associations and beliefs about what vulnerability means, and those things are triggered, and that causes them to withdraw or retreat. Another one is, we'll call this a connection hangover. And this is when there's been so much connection that their cup kind of got really filled and maybe even overflowed. And again, it threatens that subconscious comfort zone. So then they'll have this strategy and need to like push away and retreat in that form. And sometimes that occurs with like sort of these intrusive thoughts, doubting or reassessing the relationship after the connection. So it's not uncommon for a DA to be like in a relationship, not especially, but quite often like early on in the dating phase or the early honeymoon phase. And then there's a lot of connection, maybe, you know, yourself and your dismissive avoidant partner or ex or whoever you're thinking about in your life as you're watching this video. Maybe there was like a great time that you had or a great weekend away or whatever it might be. And then they sort of go missing for 1 or 2 days, or not even like missing per se, but just like a little extra quiet than usual when you return. It's usually because two things are happening. Number one, that connection itself feels outside of the comfort zone, and their brain is trying to equilibrate. Our brain always tries to equilibrate according to our belief patterns and our needs. It wants to get into that homeostatic space. It wants that balance again. So there can be that connection hangover where it's like, whoa, I'm out of balance. I need to reconnect to myself. And they sort of have this anxious relationship to themselves. And so they need to retreat and reconnect to themselves and do all of that. And so that can be their way of balancing or equilibrating. But also it can feel scary to them. And so it sort of triggers those feelings of vulnerability, safety, etc. And they try to go back to their comfort zone and push away to protect themselves at a subconscious level as a result. Another type of deactivating strategy we'll see specifically at the thought level is, it's not uncommon for dismissive avoidants to doubt their feelings. There are two underlying reasons for this. Number one, they tend to have deactivating thoughts so often. Remember the frequency we talked about, that aren't necessarily strong, but imagine all day long if you have these competing needs. So you want connection, but then you have all these really painful beliefs or fears about it at the same time, okay? Then you might like go for it, but then this part of you is kind of always at war with yourself, and that's going to confuse you about your own feelings because you have both positive and negative associations kind of happening frequently at the same time around connection itself. And this might be like a bit of a silly analogy, but like, let's pretend that you played a sport, okay? And let's say you played a sport and you had a lot of fun playing that sport, and then one day you got injured playing the sport. When you go to return to the sport, maybe you have these feelings that come up like, oh, I love the sport, but is it really worth it? You know, I have to protect my body, especially as I get older. I want my knees to be in good shape. I need to walk around. I don't want arthritis. And it might make you feel like you love the sport less because you like love it and had so much fun with it. But then you also, your brain, because of that painful injury, built in these subconscious associations. It was imprinted emotionally by the pain of the injury. And now you start having competing needs, right? So if it's a sport, you kind of have to like step back and make a conscious decision. But in a relationship, that's exactly what's happening too. However, a lot of the time in a relationship, you want to be able to break through those painful associations you've built in by reprogramming them and opening yourself to connection, because it's actually healthy and it's one of our needs to have connection, to have vulnerability, to have intimacy. And it doesn't have to be to like the nth degree, and it definitely shouldn't be in a codependent way. But a lot of the feeling doubts would be sort of the same. Like if you go back to that sport analogy, the person didn't learn to, they didn't, let's say it was soccer. You didn't love soccer less because you got injured, but it seems like you did because you start questioning if you should keep playing and what it's going to do and the fears. It doesn't mean that you look at the sport and you're like, oh, the sport's just not fun anymore. It sucks. It's not that. You didn't lose your love or enjoyment or pleasure from the sport. You just now have competing needs and associations around if the sport is safe or not, and it doesn't take away from how fun actually playing the sport is. It just takes away from the overall decisions you want to make around it and the sort of fears that come up connected to it. It's not the sport itself, but it's what could happen while playing the sport, if that makes sense. So you can ask yourself, if you are the dismissive avoidant watching this, like, when I deactivate in that way, when I start doubting my feelings, is this based on fear or truth? And if it's fear, then it's really important to reprogram those fears and break through them. If it's truth, because maybe it's not the right person in the relationship, or you know, the person's broken your trust, or whatever it might be in that category, you'll know the difference, but you have to first be able to pause and consider that in questioning where you stand in the relationship that way. So the last three types of deactivating strategies are a fear of not meeting somebody's expectations. Dismissive avoidants sometimes feel like they're in like a bit of a fog when it comes to what emotional expectations are in a relationship, how they should operate, all these different things. And a lot of DAs won't necessarily admit this because it's a vulnerable thing. But imagine if, like, you know, you start playing a board game and everybody has the rules to the board game, but you only got half the set of rules as everybody else did. You go in and, like, obviously that's going to impact how skilled you are at playing the game. And to a certain degree, this is sort of what's happened with dismissive avoidance. Like, if you didn't have a lot of emotional availability and mirroring and modeling that gave you the rules of how to connect in this way, it's going to feel like a blurrier area, like kind of confusing at times. And that will create feelings of discomfort. And then usually the dismissive avoidance knee-jerk reaction or coping mechanism for dealing with the emotions of fear or discomfort is to withdraw and retreat. That's their behavioral pattern they've often made as an adaptation. So it's not uncommon that if there's a lack of clarity in how somebody's communicating a need in a relationship in terms of what they think the need should look like, or meeting it, or to know if they're doing a good job in the relationship. You know, dismissive avoidants often want like direction and clarity so badly because they're still trying to learn the rules of the game, and it makes them feel safe. Like, hey, here's the rule book, here's the handbook, actually tends to help them. So when they fear that they're not meeting expectations, sometimes you'll see them deactivate in that way and withdraw there. And the last two are, and this is a bit of a different thing in a way. It's like the infatuation with an ex. Okay, so when intimacy, emotional intimacy, feels too overwhelming or scary, sometimes dismissive avoidance will start, and this is like a very well-known thing in like the basics of dismissive avoidant attachment styles. They're known to sort of like put an ex on a pedestal a lot of the time, or a past connection or a past relationship. And this is something that fearful avoidants do as well to a certain degree. But think about it. Like, if I can keep, let's pretend that I'm the dismissive avoidant, and let's pretend I have all these fears of connection, closeness, all these things. If I can keep in my mind all the like good things that I see about, you know, an ex or somebody from the past, what happens? Well, it acts as a wall between myself and being fully vulnerable and available to the relationship. Now, it's like the always keeping the door open for the what if. Now, sometimes there can be actual feelings there, but a lot of times when I've asked this question specifically to dismissive avoidants, hey, do you think that you keep that person there just to like act as a buffer between you and the emotional intimacy and vulnerability required in your relationship now? Or do you think that you truly have deep feelings for this person and you would still want to be with them and that that's the one, or you should leave your relationship and go figure that out? And the vast, vast, vast majority of the time I hear them say, oh yeah, it's probably a buffer. And it's because the subconscious mind likes to keep that like buffer in between so that it creates more space, which creates the illusion of more safety in a relationship, where in actuality, it might actually be doing the opposite, like subconsciously self-sabotaging the relationship, creating more problems, challenges, conflicts, and maybe even creating the potential of a likelihood of a breakup or a relationship ending and the pain that causes to recur. So that's a really big one. And then the other reason that a dismissive avoidant will sometimes infatuate with the ex as well is that dismissive avoidants tend to have feelings, and I'm sort of putting this as a separate deactivating strategy, but it's like related to the same thing. So this is our last one. They can also have feelings for fictional characters. So people on television, movies, actors, actresses. I was sort of mentioning this recently, but that they can also be used as a buffer between themselves and their current relationship as well. Like, oh, but look at all the qualities there. And they can even go so far as to like compare their current relationship to that character in a movie, like a fictional character. And I wouldn't say that I see this all the time, but I would say I see it enough to like put this in this video because it's enough of a pattern. And it tends to be very much related to, again, the same reason. It's like, let me keep something here so I don't invest myself fully, open my heart fully, expose myself fully to the dangers of what it means to love and be vulnerable and open myself up, because I could potentially get hurt or be really emotionally unsafe again. So these are the types of deactivating strategies. And in a future video, because I know a lot of you were asking questions about the why. In a future video, I can also make a little bit, do a little bit about like how to break through these things specifically. So let me know if you want to see that, or if you want to see the different activating, deactivating strategies specifically for the other attachment styles first. Let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for being here and for watching, and I will see you in the next video.